Okay, good evening. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our open room session for tonight, which is called Firehawks, with artist Stephen King, project participant Jenny, and criminologist Joanna Foster from FABDIC, which is an organisation dedicated to supporting children and families living with fire-setting behaviour. I'm Liz Viora. I'm Open Eye Gallery's Head of Social Practice, and I'm going to be your host for tonight. So just before we formally start, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping for those of you that are watching us live. So we have a chat function on Twitch, which you're free to use throughout the event. So if you have any questions, then you can pop those into there and we'll be able to see them to answer later on. Don't worry, if you don't have a Twitch account though, then you can send questions to us via Twitter using the hashtag OpenEye. So we'll make sure we have a bit of time for Q&A near the end. And so any questions, just let us know. We'll also be recording this session and it will be added to our YouTube channel for future viewing. So just to offer a little bit of context for tonight's discussion, Firehawks is a new research project by artist Stephen King exploring children and adults who set fires in the UK. And it's funded by Open Eye Gallery and Arts Council England. The project Firehawks takes its name from an Australian bird which creates bushfires by dropping already burning sticks in an attempt to direct prey fleeing from the original blaze. They actively transform their landscapes to ensure their nourishment and account as a key cause of bushfires in Australia. And so with that, I'd love to hand over to Stephen, Joanna and Jenny, firstly to introduce themselves, and then we're going to hear more about the research project from Stephen. And then we'll open out to questions from the audience today. So over to you guys.
Hi everyone. So yeah, thanks Liz. My name's Stephen King. I'm a socially engaged documentary photographer, and my practice usually focuses on shared experience, shared memory, and that could be to do with social spaces, maybe shared cognitive experiences. And yeah, so this is part of very early days of a project which is based around the idea of how we could research to how we could actually photograph the subject of juvenile fire setting. Obviously I have a personal experience of this, but we'll go on to that later on. So I'd like to pass over to Joanna.
Thank you, Stephen. Liz, delighted to be on screen with you all, and I think the response to this event, the number of people who've signed up and are listening, is testament to the project itself and indeed people's interest in this subject that isn't a topic that's often talked about in this kind of way. So when Stephen approached me, at first, I must admit I was dubious. Into the inbox came a message from Stephen King, and I was like, oh, what's this now? Because I get lots of different requests to do the random, the ridiculous. But actually, speaking with Stephen, having spent nearly 18 years working with children and teenagers who set fires, and believing absolutely that the setting of fire is a communication. What is being communicated? How do we listen? The idea that this could give a voice to people who used to set fires, and in a way that's creative and safe, well, gosh, it just feels, as I said, really exciting to be here. And I think an incredible opportunity for anyone who's interested in this field to really think about how do we portray this subject, how do we give that voice, and let's start an intelligent conversation around this behaviour that doesn't have to swing from the pendulum of it's boys will be boys, ignore it, it will go away, to the whole, oh, they must all be mad, bad or sad. So delighted to be involved from the beginning and to see exactly where the project goes. Jenny.
Sorry, I stayed muted and I didn't realise. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. I'm from London. I'm someone who's involved in the project and I'm currently studying photography. I don't really have much to say past that point, but I'm very excited for this project and I'm glad this is live streamed for everyone to see how amazing it's going to be. So.
Thank you. And can I also add, actually, Jenny made a comment that OpenAI is very on trend right now because we are streaming on Twitch. So yeah, so we're feeling quite good about that, just have to say.
Versus me, who was like, what's Twitch? I've never heard of it before. Spot the old person in the room. So yes, kudos to Jenny as ever for keeping me on my toes.
So Stephen, I think you had a presentation you wanted to run through with us.
Yeah.
All right.
Hang on, let me share my screen.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, is that sharing?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So to start with, I'd like to point out that the whole point of this project and why I'm here and speak to people like Joanna and Jenny is because I know absolutely nothing really about this subject before I really started. This was something that I experienced as a young child, based in reflection, sort of in middle age, started to realize that this was fueled by trauma in my childhood. And I started to question those sorts of drivers of why I, as a young child, very young, would find that leap from trauma, that not really trying to be able to understand and make sense of things and make sense of the world, maybe feeling a little bit challenged by my environment, adults, how I would make that leap to fire. I don't really, and that's the thing that's really come back. I've started to really try and understand my experiences and what happened. And that was what really interested me. And then I found the research of Joanna and started to realize that it's a more common thing of like children using this elemental force as a voice, as a way of getting attention, as a way, and for me personally, it was a way of controlling my environment and reflecting back into my environment and my landscape, being able to have some control and change my sort of metaphorically change my landscapes, which I thought was a very accomplished way of thinking for a very young boy who wasn't thinking about anything like that. So that's what really started to interest me. So to try and make sense of this project, as mentioned, is a research project to try and discover ways of how these thoughts sort of come about, how they're nurtured in the mind of young people, and how now, looking back on it with more reflection and hopefully with more contact with other participants, how can you use photography to represent this, not document it really, but how do we represent it in a sort of more kind of a fine art approach, but ultimately a documentary piece of people's experiences. So yeah, so at no point is any of this fully formed or of coming from any sort of informed angle really. So my first point of call was to go back and visit places that were poignant to me and my experiences. They could be direct fire setting or something, or things that represent that behavior. And it took me a long time to figure out how to even do this. And the idea was this could be knowing that it's quite a difficult thing for myself to start to talk about. It's taken me a few years just to get to this point of visualizing that and actualizing a project that I will actually make some work about. I had to go back to these places and revisit and re-photograph to kind of make an understanding. Like when you go back to school and you realize how small all the tables and toilets are. It was one of those sort of experiences. It was really hard to try and make, and especially to represent it through photography. So this image is quite important to me. This was, so all these images will start as I offer these over, and it will hopefully be a starting point for a conversation, a trigger point that someone else might be able to sort of access in or open up from or connect to in some way. But it's also me kind of opening myself up to someone to hopefully feel a bit more comfortable in talking about these things. So this is my first place that I have an experience of. This is somewhere when I went, so when I was really young, this was 3 foot, 4 foot high bushes. And it was something that I really sort of became really represented representative of my sort of needs and wants and behavior of that age, that I would always hide. It was a common theme that was so through this reflection into this behavior, other behaviors sort of started to come up to the surface, which are obviously part of that trauma. So hiding, control over my environment, feeling like I don't have a voice. So I went back to this place, and now they're trees. They're like massive. You look at the, you can see there's a lamppost next to it, and it's yeah, completely transformed. So my last memory of it was hiding in this place. Is a place where I would always go and hide from adults, and I could peer out and feel like I had control and see people where they're coming, and they wouldn't know where I was. And that was a feeling of power that I got, and that was why I think it drew me to this place, was be my first inkling of lighting the match and seeing what it would do. And but these were little bushes. I can't stress enough how small these bushes were when I was here. So going back was quite another thing of seeing that transformation in the landscape. So as I say, it was quite difficult for me to find a way to even represent it, and I didn't want to go back and just document it as here is this place, here is this space, because it wasn't that. It wasn't a space. I had a real poignant connection to it, so it was very strongly a place to me, and I wanted to try and represent that in some way. So that's why they are quite stylized, these images, but I'll explain that as we go on. So I'll move on to the next image. Oh, it's not letting me do it, sorry. Oh, there we go. So as I say, I went back, I probably photographed it 3 or 4 times in different ways, different approaches to try and get to this. And what I had to do was really slow it down. So I've shot all these on medium format film. They're all quite, I mean, the fact that I'd been back so many times, I'd kind of figured it out in my head. So in the scale of other photographers shooting in this way, it was probably quite quick, but I'd had a long time going back, recce in the place, understanding what it was and trying to figure out how I would photograph it. So for me, you know, ultimately to get to this image, it was quite a long process. And as you can see, some of these, the thing that came out for them all was the transformative nature of them all. So none of the, like these from now on, I mean, that those bushes are quite representative of how it was. But this, none of this was here. A lot of this was like wasteland or like old broken down buildings or something like that. And that's why you can see, so these are like early 1980s new builds. And these wouldn't have happened if my behavior hadn't have impacted that landscape. And I was quite shocking really to realize that, oh my God, I've got an absolute connection to this brick wall. It's only a brick wall, you know, but to really feel a connection to that landscape, like a symbiosis with what I was photographing. So all of these, I say, are shot on medium format film, and the colorization, why it looks quite strange, is they're all studio lit. Obviously, they're all done on location. They're all like extensively lit, and all of the flashlights are all filtered with color gels at the exact same color temperature of flame on the Kelvin scale. So that's why they all have this sort of look. So it's all through this sort of filter of trying to get connection with the landscape, with the subject, and also that feeling and sort of cognitive space and the actual physical behavior. But I didn't want to, I just wanted to slightly sort of a doff of the hat to it, almost, not really, you know, go at it too much. So again, you can see this a bit more. This is somewhere, obviously, a place where they would keep bins. And now it's in a cage. Maybe that's for that exact reason. It was really interesting that everywhere there would have been some sort of transformation because of what had sort of gone on. Again, this was another place. This was really quite interesting. I remember saying this, we discussed this with Jenny the other day, and whilst I was discussing it, another memory came back, that this was somewhere why I did this. This was a total revenge. Like, this was somewhere which was like a broken down old building that as kids, you weren't allowed to go, don't go and play in there. It was like dangerous. It was my first run-in with someone on drugs, and there was someone living there rough. I imagine in the 80s, it was like heroin that they were sort of engaging in. But we stumbled across him, and they came out, chased us off. And this guy came, and I was probably 8 years old, and he kicked me really badly in the back, attacked me, and I got away. And I felt so like aggrieved because it was something else, let by another adult. And I went back to almost representatively change this and destroy it. No, there was no one there. There was never any. I never harmed anyone. I always made sure of that. But the other thing was that from it was, I noticed that it was quite close to in a town, and all the others were quite far out. And this, when this happened, it didn't really do a great amount of damage. But the fire brigade came out. And that gave me, like, I can remember it. And I was controlling these adults, and I was sat there at the side of, like, on a wall across down the street watching this happen. And that was another element that really came back to me about, like, having control over adults that I felt completely out of control with, and having this, another level of influence over my environment. Okay, and this is the last one. As I say, there's only a few here, and they're just points of reference to start conversations. This again was a huge, like a couple of miles long, that bordered on a house, on a like big old horrible 60s housing estate. But there were bushes nowhere near like this big. Same again as the first one, and it was like a big tunnel underneath that you go and play as a kid. And because it was near these housing estates, I realized, again, this was afterwards, that fire people would come, people would tend to it, I could watch it, and I could get that rush of watching people reacting to my actions. Obviously, I felt like I wasn't noticed or listened to by adults. Probably there's probably things, a call for attention, never aside from the control. But then again, what I loved from this was the transformative nature. So this had been it was like a tunnel, and the top had been burnt off, and it became open, and then consequently it had taken on as a community garden, and now it's an orchard. And these trees, since that had happened, and as I went back, these apple trees and pear trees are all in blossom. I just found it was a total moving moment for me, to be honest with you, and that's why I've really I found a real connection, and I took real time with this image. I tried to, it's got a really delicate feel to it. I think I tried to approach it in that way, because it did feel, it didn't feel as maybe aggressive as the other ones. And a call for help. It was this was one of the last ones. It didn't last very long, my sort of fire setting behavior. I found something else came along, which luckily jolted me off down another road, another obsession, a wholesome obsession that I found, and it completely changed the course of my life. But that aside, it's something else. But that's what I think, this is one of the, if not the final one that I can remember, and going back and seeing the community were using it, and it had such beauty, and it was flourishing, and it was producing stuff. It was a poignant moment to photograph these. So yes, so these are, as I say, hopefully these will act as a starting point for a conversation, or even just a thought process that someone might go away and then come back and have some sort of representation, or trigger a memory, or just even a comment is plenty enough. So yeah, that's where we're up to at the moment with this project, and I'm just in hope that we will find some other participants and be able to share it widely and start a conversation. Should I unshare the screen now? Sorry.
Whichever you think is better, Stephen. Is it a good backdrop, or does it feel easier to have the conversation if it's not there? Entirely your images. What do you want to do with them?
No, we'll leave it up then. We'll leave it up. I like this one.
Yes. And it's not often I'm left without words, but there's almost a sense here of where do I start? When you say you hope these could start a conversation, a comment, the number of comments I could come back with on so many different levels. Of course, my interest in this field is working with children and teenagers who set fires and trying to understand what's the reason for the behaviour and how do we support that child and teenager to become safer. I don't know if it is something you'd be prepared to say. I was really struck when you said something else came along that became your obsession, and where indeed might you be if there hadn't been that replacement? And I listened to you almost on this cliff edge of thinking at any moment this could have gone so horribly wrong in what could have happened to you, what could have happened to others. So, for example, when you showed the building where it was previously a disused building and there was the rough sleeper who hurt you, and Stephen, I'm really sorry that as a child you were so hurt by adults, that as a young boy you had to hide in bushes so you could see adults and they couldn't see you. And you made me think straight away of, why do so many kids wear hoods? You know, the hoodie generation, the Asbos. It's the same idea of, in your adolescence, you want to check out the adults before they can check you out. It's why kids used to sit in bus shelters when we had halcyon days of bus shelters that you could actually sit in and see out and stay in with your friends. So when you talked about that fire, the person who hurt you, you went back at age 8, you had that sense of, right, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to find my revenge. And you said there wasn't anybody in the building, but you made me think of the London Fire Brigade has a very powerful resource that it makes available to children and families and professionals of a teenage girl who set a fire in a disused building. And she didn't think anybody was in that building. And indeed there was a person sleeping rough. He was killed in that fire, and her later story, and it's the story she tells, it's called Nia's story, talks about her arrest, her time in a young offenders institute, and what she's done since, working with the fire brigade to understand what happened, to try to build some kind of repair for her and others that she hurt. And I think in so many of these pictures, Stephen, that could have been you. It could be so many of the children I work with and others work with, that the moment's chance, that change, a change in wind direction, somebody actually being in that building, and your life would have changed catastrophically. And so I sit here, hence why I say on an almost cliff edge of, thank goodness we can sit here and learn from you and be reminded that so many of the children and teenagers we work with, they're not looking to cause harm. Yes, you talked about revenge, I'll get you back, but he wasn't in the building. So there's part of you that wants to say, right, I'll show you how an 8-year-old can. And the relief that it was indeed okay and others were okay, but my goodness, it could have been so different. And then I also think of how many of these, and we have to be careful because fire, the language around fire can start to seem and feel very cliched, but how much of this does seem to be like the phoenix rising. Yourself, how you have transformed, how you are different, and how you've achieved that journey, Stephen, after all that happened to you, is credit to you. Absolutely. But how the landscapes have transformed, the fact that these are trees in blossom, it's an orchard. And what I'm really super curious to know, if it's okay to ask, in the second image, you said that sight is changed because of what you did. So in what way is it now so different and allows you to be able to say, that's because of what I did?
Just purely that, as I say, it was like scrubland, the one, and then when it like a fire happened and it was flattened and black, and then straight away someone built on it. You know, that it just seemed like my reaction opened opportunity to someone else, which was sort of also representative, maybe, that I felt like people took advantage of me as a child, and they took advantage of my actions. So it was very strange, and it was this really ugly, horrible, not, you know, just a brick wall of this thing that was there. Yeah, it was a very, as I say, it was a very strange, I had a very strange symbiosis with that landscape. To shoot that one, it wasn't very nice.
And when you talk about the power and control, and this is what we know from what research tells us, any of us who work directly with children and teenagers, they'll often talk about this need for a voice, to take control, to have some power. Because how do you have power as an 8-year-old, especially over adults? Did that realization of just how controlling you could be of adults, the fire service, the firefighters, did it ever feel frightening to realize, gosh, this actually now is the power I could have and indeed do have?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the exhilaration. That was the thing, completely exhilarating. And feeling kind of, from usually feeling unheard, a bit invisible at times, that you could have this strength. Yeah, it was quite addictive. That was what, yeah, exactly what you're saying. You could have very easily on the precipice, on the cliff edge. They could have, say, it was a very short period of time, luckily, but I could see how people could get really hooked on that feeling. Yeah.
This might feel a question that's not okay to answer. And if that's the case, Stephen, we shall move on. You can say, okay, Foster. But as an adult, when there's been times when life throws up all that life can throw at us, has there ever been the thought to set a fire again?
No, not at all. I actually almost, that was a part of what I'd almost compartmentalized it, put it away, not forgotten about it, but never even opened that box in my mind till I got to like middle age. And I was quite shocked at my power of being able to do that, to not even go there. And it wasn't like I'd forgotten it. I knew it was, but then when I started to unpack it, was like, oh, why have I just like left this like over there? How could I? It was yeah, it's interesting what the mind can do.
Indeed, indeed. And when you go back to these places, does it feel that it's okay to revisit? It is your choice to do the project, but are you glad to be revisiting these spaces?
Yeah, now that I've sort of confronted it and thought it through, and now I'm trying to make like positively, like you know, create through it and be creative and make work through it and connect with other people and make some sense of it. Absolutely, it was challenging, but yeah, rewarding, greatly rewarding. And each time I look back at these images, there's something else in it. Even now, you know, there was some new stuff where I'm like, oh, this is coming out. And when we spoke the other day with Jenny, new things were coming up for me all the time. And I've looked at these images, you know, hundreds of times. So I'm hopefully that will do that for other people. That's the main thing, is this point, is to try and understand in that research of how that leap happened. I still can't figure that out. I mean, in your research, in your experience, Joanna, do you have any sort of enlightenment, maybe? And I don't expect you to have any answers on that, of how that leap happens to go to fire. How does a young child do that?
No, and it's a terrific question. And ever since you asked it, it's been really present for me, is what's the moment where it goes into, right, this is what I'm going to do, because from what you're describing of your childhood, Stephen, these things have been there for some time. Yet there was that moment. Was it the day? What was it? I would suggest it's often about the opportunity of it, that a child in a moment is feeling powerless, invisible, hidden, not seen, wanting to get attention, which we talk about so negatively. Oh, he's attention seeking. What's wrong with children seeking attention? That's what we're meant to do. That's how we survive as human beings, because we get the attention, the attachment of someone else. And so I do wonder if in that moment the opportunity is there, the box of matches, the lighter, that then allows a child to go from all that is happening internally to then be something that can happen externally. I have no research to say that is what happens, but I wonder from the many cases I've worked with that it's the opportunity, the access is there. And once it's done once and it's brought an effect, an impact, something shifted and changed, then why wouldn't a child do it again? I say this with real caution, trusting the audience's intelligence and those of us on screen here, that in some ways, I'm surprised more children in trauma, in turmoil, who are hidden, who are hurting, don't use fire more, because it's so difficult to ignore. You can ignore many behaviours, but it's really difficult to ignore a child who is setting fires. And even though I said in the beginning, this notion of, oh, ignore it because boys will be boys, if a child is setting fires more than once in a home or in a setting where the fire service are going to attend more than once, that starts to become hard to ignore. So there's almost a siren call of the fire setting itself that says, see me, hear me, notice me. And my worry is always, if we don't start paying attention to that signal, that communication, where does the child go next to get our attention, to be seen, to self-soothe? And I wonder, and I noticed Jenny's put her camera on, and you talk directly, Stephen, saying when you were in conversation with Jenny, and I wonder how much what you were saying is resonating with her and what her story was, her reasons for setting fire. So Jenny, if it feels comfortable to join the conversation.
There was multiple times where I wanted to join the conversation, but I was enjoying listening so much. It's resonating a lot. It's crazy in my mind right now, because I'm thinking about how similar mine and his experiences have been, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
Tell us a little bit more, if it's okay. The same goes for you as with Stephen. You can say, no, Joanna, not now. But what is resonating?
Well, if I'm remembering it correctly, I actually think I said this to Stephen when he showed these to me a while ago. How, if I'm remembering it correctly, didn't I say it was you and me had a very similar sense of power when we set fires? There was a lot of intense emotion in regarding that, because it just, when external forces kind of take things out of your control, for me personally, fire was that thing I had control over. And that was something I mentioned to you, and it was something while you guys were talking, I was thinking about it again. Yeah. I don't have much to say besides that.
And did you find, as I said, with this is to sort of hopefully bring some attention to the project and the whole issue, in itself, but do you think that those images worked in that way for us when we had that conversation? Did they act as a good starting point for us to sort of leap into that difficult subject?
Yeah, it is, because the pictures that you showed us they're very peaceful. They're very peaceful to me to look at, and it feels easy to open that conversation when the pictures are already telling a story.
Right.
That opens that discussion.
I think that's a really clever point about the peacefulness of the pictures. So when I said in the introduction, the nervousness when I was first approached by Steve and, photographing children who set fires, I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be added to the delete bin and the block of the sender's address, because people are often looking for that voyeuristic, the sensationalist. And yet none of these pictures are that. There is a serenity, there is a calmness, there is a peace. As different as the images are, some feel rural, natural, then we go to the stark bin in a cage, as you described it. But what we don't have any evidence of is, oh, well, there was obviously a fire there. It's not the charred, the burnt, the destroyed. And especially when you say, because of what was destroyed, something new happened. And again, part of me teeters on this cliff edge of thinking, oh my gosh, if we don't give children an alternative, if they start to realise this is the control and power they can have, and from distraction can come something more beautiful, we as adults really need to take responsibility for how are we looking after our children. And clearly, Stephen, in your case, you weren't looked after. Where was the person who had your back? And so it makes me think that, yes, whatever came along and took you on a different route, and you're on screen and can talk about it in this way now, what about those children who don't get that? Whether it's a significant adult or a thing or a hobby or something. And so I'm really struck by there is really more than ever this sense of responsibility that as adults, we treat child fire setting as an adult problem. That somehow we are allowing our children the opportunity to do this because we're not giving them a voice. We are not seeing them. And of course, not every child who sets fire has trauma. I don't also want to give that misconception. Children will play and be mischievous and do things they're not meant to do. But for those children where, and Jenny also, where it resonates with her, where it was about control and power because so much else was outside of any agency you had, we really need to be stepping up more and thinking about the areas that we know where children are setting fires over and over. Who's going along and talking to these children and finding out what's happening? Is it only the response of, well, lock them up and throw away the key? Why are our children needing to be out at 8 years old or whatever age setting fires? Where are us as the adults to be asking, really asking, and prepared for the answer we might get as to why children are setting fires?
Thank you.
I'm really glad that you sort of picked up on that idea of that peacefulness and the serenity in it. Was what was difficult for me and why I had to keep going back to try and re-explore these places to get these images in this way, because they didn't feel comfortable the many times that I did them, and I was trying to kind of represent where I was there then, experiencing it in a place of quite calm reflection, and just trying to align all those things. I don't know who it is that there's a quote of, I think it might be Cartier-Bresson, says that photography is aligning the brain, the eye, and the heart. And it's kind of what I was trying to do here, really, just trying to not try and over stylize things, but I had to bring that level into kind of represent where my thoughts and relationship to those spaces were.
It might be a good time to open up discussion from some questions we've been getting in. I've been really busily making notes as well, actually, because there's loads of things I want to ask, but actually I think Joanna may have covered quite a lot of it, so thank you for that. But yeah, it just really poignant to see the pictures in the sense that literally as you've grown, you go back and in the rural situation, those spaces have literally grown as well. Those trees have become full size as you've become full size adult, and to see them in that way is actually quite a, you know, I imagine it's quite a difficult but also cathartic process to do so, and see that space in a different way. But we had a comment in from one of our audience members on Twitch, Tommy, who it was kind of a comment. He'd said he particularly loved the orchard picture. It feels very emotional to him, and he was thankful for kind of hearing your journey about it, Stephen, and also the difficulty of hearing about, you know, things, the situation where you were kicked at that spot and you wanted revenge in that other location. But he wanted to ask, and he said he's sorry if he missed it, and I couldn't remember it actually either. At what age did you stop setting fires?
I think it was from age 8 till about 10.
8 to 10. He also asked again, or somebody else, sorry, also asked if we were allowed to ask what the other obsession was that you moved on to.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to answer, but
skateboarding.
What am I with that?
I love it.
Interpreting my environment and my landscape again. So it's really interesting. So I have these common themes, and through skateboarding is how I found photography, which again is me controlling my environment, and it's just common behavior, but just more wholesome as it went on and changed.
Brilliant.
He'll be happy you got that. It was a very one like, are we allowed to? It was a very polite question. Are we allowed to ask? Are we allowed to ask this? So yes, we were, and we got the answer. So thank you, Stephen. There was also another question around for Joe about, obviously we talked a little bit already about the potential for where this project might go, but have you, within your own kind of previous work experience, worked with visual arts at all through this process, and particularly with photography or a broader visual arts form? Like, is this something you've actively used with teenagers and children before? And if so, does this feel quite different, I guess, to those other ones?
So there's a yes and a no. And again, I thought, just like Stephen's question of where's that point? Where does it go into an actual act of setting a fire? So I always advocate for working creatively. I do not understand why ordinarily we interpret and understand the world around us through the 5 senses. Do we insist that communication has to predominantly be the verbal? And especially when it's difficult stuff to talk about, we rely all the more on the verbal only. And we take away from adults, our children, teenagers, the opportunity to express in lots of different ways. So I always advocate for creative working. So Jenny will confirm that when we work together, she produced some of the most fantastic creative work together, from poetry through to collages. And so what I've done in the past is I've taken photos of people's artwork with their permission. I've taken copies, again, with their permission, but I've never actually used photographs themselves. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, there was the blind spot, Foster. Why on earth haven't you ever used photography before? So I'm thinking now in the future, if I'm working with a teenager, what's wrong with the idea of giving them a disposable camera and asking them to document, to photograph stuff that happens from the time we're together to the next time we are together? And of course, there'll be the conversation about, you know, how do we stay safe in the photos we take of ourselves and others? What would be okay for somebody to see and share? And that in itself would be a useful conversation. But what a way to see into the world of a child or teenager we're working with, that so often I'll ask, how has it been since we were last together? Tell me what's been happening. But if they could hand to me their documentary, their story, is it places? And there'd be no criteria. It hasn't been, oh, where were you thinking of setting a fire? Take a photo of it. But to really give this teenager, this child, another form of voice that shows, whoa, this person's interested. And what will my ideas be? And does it then give me another layer of insight into, yeah, what's their life? Is there something here that's telling me, wonder if this is about the reasons for setting fires? So if nothing else, I'm just glad to be involved in this project because it's making me think more about how do we give creative opportunities to children and teenagers. And Richard Attenborough says it so powerfully that it's not all children, of course not, but many children I work with are in homes where poverty is a reality. Parents are making decisions between heating and eating, juggling however many jobs. And children in these homes, they don't suffer from lack of imagination or lack of creativity. They suffer from lack of opportunity. So all these activities could start to open up. Stephen's new obsession became skateboarding, that introduced him into photography. And if we don't start to equip our children and teenagers with more than one way to capture what they're feeling and express what is happening, then again, we're doing a disservice and we'll miss so much. And the opportunities we're closing down for them when everyone's got a story, and what a way to capture and tell a story.
And how about you, Jenny? Because obviously you mentioned that you are studying photography at the moment, is that right?
Yes, I'm in my final year.
So how have you've obviously worked with Joanna before, kind of using creative outlets, but I guess within this new project with Stephen, how have you found the process of working with him as a photographer, but also him coming from his own lived experience that you said was similar to your own? Like, do you have any kind of aspirations for what might happen next for the project, or what you hope at least audience maybe get from it at the end?
Well, the process, I've actually found the process to be quite fascinating. It's been really amazing to watch the pieces of his project kind of fall into place and to sort of watch it grow from the very beginning. And I feel very lucky that I get to see it from beginning to end. And honestly, I think what I would want people to take away from this is a sense of reassurance that they're not alone, and I guess a sense of peace. I know that's a reoccurring word for me right now, but I want them to kind of feel peace of mind, that again, like I said, that they're not alone in all of this, that their experiences are not scary, almost, I want to say, that they're not stuck in this place. I'm sorry, I'm reading off my notes because I've been trying my best to prepare for this. Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't want them to feel alone in their emotions, because it can be quite it can be a very lonely experience from my own personal experience. And to be honest, from the beginning of this project, it's been very reassuring for me to know that I wasn't alone, just by talking to Stephen and having that communication back and forth with him. It's been quite amazing, and I think the project is really, really cool.
Yeah, and hopefully we can build on that and move forward. I really, really want Jenny to be part of this moving forward. And like you just said, I'm sure that there's many, many, many adults out there who don't ever speak of these sorts of experiences and have shame about it, and get just fearful for people's reactions, and who have more than likely done this sort of thing as child in secret on their own. So I'm really interested to hear, and hopefully this will be a point where people will start to open up, even if they want to just open up to me and don't make it, that's fine.
Yeah, I think that there's ambitions that obviously as part of tonight's event, it's kind of a way to do a semi kind of call out for other people who might be, that this conversation resonates with them in some way, either currently or, as you say, as an adult reflecting back, maybe suddenly actually realizing this was a process they went through. Because I can imagine how as an adult, not that you forget, but you might put it somewhere else. you might park it in a bit that you don't want to go back to, and kind of forget that you had that part of you in you, and that's what you did. But then actually when you hear it back as an adult, you go, actually I went through that exact same or very similar experience, and like you say, it takes a while to come to terms with what it was and why you did it. And
and especially if its root cause is somewhere else, somewhere painful and traumatic or whatever that might be, then you're probably focusing on that and not remembering the output. You know, that's the thing, that the cause is what you're kind of reflecting back on and like as an adult, and then it could get lost, is what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. There's been another not a question, it's a comment, but it's using a term I haven't heard of. I don't think I've heard of, so I'm gonna read it out. So someone said that it's been really interesting to hear about this, thinking a lot about children's deep need and kind of ecological drives for essentially what they call like elemental play, and how adults polarize this into a destructive behavior when involving fires. But it could be seen as constructive if it was an adult situation in a controlled environment, such as a forest school. So he's talked about, there's a specific play archetype called mastery play, when a child diverts a stream, and this is definitely about power and lack of child's voice and trauma. So that's interesting how that person's mentioned it, you know, in one context it's completely inappropriate, in others in a different format.
Yeah, I mean, we can all remember like damming a stream as a kid. Guess it's the same kind of thing, maybe a little bit more wholesome, but you know, it's that same control of your environment as a small person that has very little control or effect on their landscapes.
And there's something here as well, that reminder of let's not pathologize or medicalize the behavior that even in very young children. So one of the leading names in the field of juvenile fire setting internationally, Professor David Kolko, who for 4 decades has researched and worked with children and families with fire setting behaviour. And he talks that fire interest is absolutely a healthy, normal, developmental journey for children to take. The point where he will even suggest that fire play, the action of children playing with fire, is common enough to be considered typical. It doesn't mean we're any less concerned, because it comes with all the risks, and the younger the child, the greater the risk of injury or fatality. So we don't go again, oh, well, they just, you know, they'll grow out of it. So we're super alert to children's interest, but it's that reminder of there's nothing wrong without children being interested in fire and the mastery, and that's where it becomes about the adult responsibility. And the question makes me think very much of a new book by Dr. Faye Horsley at the University of Newcastle, who wants us to think about a spectrum of fire setting behaviour generally. So in my work, I often talk about fire setting behaviour itself on a spectrum, but she talks about fire use on a spectrum. And where does it go from what's deemed acceptable into the unacceptable, which is usually the offending, the criminal? And that question made me think, of course, these are all constructs of what we deem to be acceptable, appropriate, healthy. How are children introduced to fire? It's elemental. It's a tool without which we cannot exist. But has it become in our culture too associated with play, celebration? There isn't the respect anymore. So absolutely, what an intelligent and informed question and reflection, that we have to sit with this behaviour and recognise that there's nothing wrong with anyone being interested in fire. It's then when it becomes an active use, well, for what reason and by whose construct is it dangerous or not? What we want are safe children and teenagers and adults, but all these things come into play. I would argue that what was happening to Stephen and Jenny was far more dangerous than their fire setting behaviour, yet it was the fire setting that seemed to be much more problematic and got the attention much more than what's happening to these children in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Joanna. I'm aware that we've only got a few minutes left, actually. So I wondered whether this might be a nice time to kind of ask you all very quickly what your kind of future aspiration is for the project, as in what is the future for the project, what's happening next with it, and if anybody's here today or might see this back when we have the YouTube recording of it, wants to get in contact actually to find out more, or feel they have a story they might want to share as well, how might they go about that? So what next, basically, and how do people get involved?
Well, as I say, the hopes for the future of this is to just gain more understanding, talk more conversations, and more input, and to be led by more participants. That's the main thing, is to just have the conversation, to have more conversations surrounding the subject, and then get a greater understanding of how how a subject like this could be represented through photography, and a wider creative practice, even if that's necessary. And hopefully we'll be able to put some contact details on the end of this, and people will get in touch. And it's great that we can do that through this platform, and you're allowing us to do this. So maybe we'll have people with that kind of savvy in that visual language, that I mean, how we've similar to, I think, well, how Joanna, you've worked with Jenny, our conversations was similar to this. I would show my images, and then we would talk for a while and discuss the images and discuss each other's experiences. But then I would say, if you could go away and just think and try and represent that thing that we're talking about, how you made that jump, or your very, very, very first memory or inkling of that experience, and sketch that out as fast and as simply and as representative as that might be. If you could do that, that was where that was as far as we went, and it was amazing, really rich, greatly insightful, and yeah, if we can get more participants involved, then I'm sure we'll get some sort of visual language that we can use.
And then Joanna or Jenny, is there anything else you wanted to add from your perspectives?
Jenny, do you want to go next? Otherwise I'm in danger of using the time that's left. You speak and then I'll finish. I know myself.
I guess the end goal is, well, to see the end of the project, to see what Stephen is gonna come up with and what amazing work is gonna come out of all of this. And I just want to be as useful and enjoy this as much as I can. So that's for me my personal end goal for it, just to see how amazing it's all going to turn out.
Jenny, no pressure, Stephen, no pressure.
No.
It's all down to Jenny anyway. It's okay.
Joanna, round us up. Go on, you've got the final minute. Go for it.
Anything that allows for an informed, intelligent, calm, reasoned conversation that's not hysterical, overreacting, that allows us to see, kids who set fires, well, let's think about Stephen, let's think about Jenny, and all those stereotypes that are damaging and dangerous and usually absolutely, utterly incorrect, that we start to move beyond that, and all the headlines when there are fires of thugs this and hooligans that, and actually what we're talking about here are human beings with something to say, and when they had no other voice, well, then this is what they used. And anything that allows adults to have that conversation, I think, can only be for the better. So I said at the start I was excited about this, and I don't get involved with projects easily. I like to think I'm helpful and accessible, but I think if there's anything that's going to do harm, I will not put my name to it. And one of my first questions to Stephen was, how do you look after people through this process? How do you look after yourself, Stephen, through this? We also had that conversation. And how Stephen has worked with Jenny, I'm confident that, yes, he approaches this with nothing but the utmost respect and care. This isn't trauma tourism. This is people telling their story in the way that they want to and often need to tell it.
Thank you,
I
Joanna.
can definitely back that
Thanks,
up.
Joanna.
He's amazing with that.
Well, it's just for me then to thank all three of you for coming along this evening and sharing your insights. It's a super exciting project, Open Eye Gallery. We're really excited when Stephen came to us about it, and we can't wait to see it develop over the coming months and years, who knows. But we are going to put a slide up for the recorded version of this with Stephen's contact details. But for now, if you're watching it live, I think my colleague, Natalie, who's been busily looking after the tech, who you never see but always manages this smoothly, has put your contact details in the chat function on Twitch. So you should be able to find it there as well. But it's just to say thank you and goodbye, basically. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, Joanna.
Real
Thanks,
pleasure.
Liz. Thanks, Jenny.
No worries.